This is IBM Museum, and here we have Robbie. In this video, we'll be running IBM's System Information Tool, or SIT, on Robbie. And I'm going to show just a brief rundown of some of the physical things on the exterior. In later videos, I'll be covering the interior and some of the things that we'll see as we run the SIT utility. Now, Robbie is badged as a IBM PS2 Model 57 SLC. And more specifically, on this style of case, there's a label down here in the corner, and it'll have the model and submodel. In this case, an 8557-055. So there were both the 8500 series and the 9500 series of the PS2s. In this instance, it actually means an older planar with the that could have either the 386SX CPU or IBM's 386 SLC CPU. And this even has a CPU daughter card in it that we'll see once we get into videos that look at the interior of this unit. And Robbie does have a little bit of a problem where the case cover doesn't go on quite right. It hangs up in the back. I'll probably address that in later videos just to kind of show how that can be fixed to what needs to nestle in to get the cover to close. And also I'll even be covering, you can hear the kind of the stick, the rubberized feet of these units in this style is known to cut. It just degrades like that case foam that we saw on the Model 60, 65SX, and Model 80s. It's on the side cover that just degenerates. And surprisingly, the smaller units than these, which is like the Model 56 or the 76 that are in the 3x3 cases, don't have that issue with the feet that were used there. It's just something with these pads on the bottom of this case it happened to degrade. So let me get back on camera here, and we'll just start running through SIT. And I do have the unit already powered up in this instance, as we can see by that green light. Let's go through and get over to the screen capture. And the first thing I did want to show from this prior to running SIT is I've actually just upgraded the video RAM yesterday. I'm going through and getting the unit set up, but we'll see Windows 3.1 later on as I go through and load the drivers for that, because this has a chipset that has had some discoveries within the last year that's been made about it. And so I first wanted to run that what's called the VESA driver. And I think I've got the directory and everything going. And so this is a terminate and stay resident utility that runs the video. It's different from the video adapter basically having a ROM BIOS extension in memory as well. And it reports now that the graphics adapter has 512K of video RAM and the modes that are available to it. This chipset is on various PS2s like the 25SX, the 35SX, the 40SX, the 8556, which, as I said, is either 386SX or 386 SLC CPU, the 8557, which is what Robbie is, and that's the same planar as in the 8556. So either a 386SX or 386 SLC based CPU on the planar. And then it's also on a microchannel adapter for the server level as well for this video chipset. So let's get started with SIT, but we do want to remember that, you know, the VESA driver in this case reports that we have 512K on the of video memory. We'll see a contradiction I know later on here in SIT. I don't actually have any adapters on Robbie at this point, so we don't really get to see any details there. And as we go through later on, of course, as I get Windows 3.1 running, I'll likely put a network adapter on there as well as other areas. Going over the hard disk, and I don't have any volume label, and just going through and telling me that it's and I think this was normally supposed to be the 80 megabyte drive, but they might call that 75 megabyte. I don't know. The nice thing is it being a later model PS2, that submodel encoding, the 055, does tell a little bit of information sometimes about whether an operating system was preloaded, and the CPU that it was issued from the factory, and then also the hard drive size, typically. Okay. And see, in this instance, it's telling us that that's, as I thought, 80. What they consider an 80 megabyte drive, even though it's in practice, as we see here, that it shows up. And so I think for one of the first times here, we see the, maybe we saw it on the Model 85X, that IML reference partition is here on this unit. And that's just basically the reference diskette being on the hard drive. It's allowed to be there if the system has a IBM SCSI that's on the system, and a process has gone through to actually create all those components of that partition to run. So you don't have to chase down a reference diskette, and it's a lot easier to configure the system later on, even bypassing, you know, a diskette drive that could fail or something like that. Just having that set up from the hard drive. And then most of the contents, of course, of the hard drive are in that that primary partition, or the operating system, and all the other things on the hard drive are. Okay. And to the diskette drive. And this is a 2.88 megabyte. These models are with the later PS2s able to run a 2.88 megabyte diskette drive. And keyboard information. So the 101/102 and the 122 keyboards are supported, just like the Model 85X, that host keyboard, the 122 keyboard. The keyboard ID is the standard thing. I've got what they call an IBM Model M keyboard connected right now. They get type-o-matic rate supported, set type-o-matic rate supported, return to default type-o-matic rate supported. Memory information, memory hardware. It tells me that I have an 8 megabyte module and then two 4 megabyte modules. And the model 56 and 57 have 3 SIM sockets. And of course, being based on a 386 or 386 SLC, a CPU with 24 address lines for memory, it's limited to 16 megabyte maximum as planar memory. And so total megabytes installed in the system board, 16 megabyte. Supported upgrade memory expansion modules. The system supports 2 megabyte 70 nanosecond parity, 4 megabyte 70 nanosecond parity, 8 megabyte 70 nanosecond parity. And I think I actually have the two 4 megabyte modules as a replacement to an 8 megabyte module that I just found is bad yesterday. So I went through and replaced them to have the same effective memory. I couldn't find another 8 megabyte module on hand to drop in there. And memory values. And this is even reporting some XMS memory. And I think that's just with the I'm loading the XMS driver on boot up. I'll have to look at that a little bit more detail, the EMM 386. And we see on this that, adapter card memory, you can't necessarily plug in memory from an adapter board, but you're able to reach the system maximum of that 16 megabytes from the three SIM sockets that are on the planar. Okay, and cacheable memory is the whole range. And memory mapping. So here we have it showing video RAM address. I don't know actually why it considers that as that block of video RAM necessarily, because this has the VESA driver. And what is even treated as the adapter ROMs. That might be for the SCSI that's integrated on the system planar. Okay, and then system ROM, both the E and the F segments. Okay. And of course, memory map above 16 megabytes is none available because this system cannot recognize anything above 16 megabytes. Okay, miscellaneous technical information. Second interrupt chip is present. Real-time clock is present. Wait on external event is unsupported. Extended BIOS data area is allocated. System has a microchannel bus. DMA supports 24-bit address space. Keyboard functionality call supported. Return POS data call supported. Return memory map call supported. Enable, disable processor functions call supported. And this with having the 386 SLC CPU as well as the upgrade daughtercards that I've got. One of those upgrade daughtercards in here can go through that the processor functions that can go through and disable that cache or enable. So that's why this system supports that call. It is able to run CPUs that can do that. Non-8042 keyboard controller in system. Data streaming is supported. SCSI subsystem present on the system board. The Model 56, Model 57 for both the 8500 series and 9500 series had SCSI integrated on the system planar, just like the Model 85X that we saw previously. It has also SCSI integrated on the planer. The information panel is not installed. It's not relevant to this case. This is an IML system, meaning having that reference diskette style partition on the hard drive that you're able to run the configuration from that partition on the system rather than having a reference diskette normally. And then SCSI support is in the IML image. Okay. And we do have the mouse driver loaded, as you can see, the little block cursor. I don't have the mouse up and handy to move that around, but we've seen that in the past. Operating system information. I've got MS-DOS 6.20 on this. That's what it came with. And the name of Robbie in this case, I think it's strange for me to name systems like that. I think I just agreed with somebody that sold me or gave me the system that I would keep the name that they had given the system, and that's why it's one of the about the only system that I have given a name to. Some of my servers I later on gave I named just a couple of them. Mainly the server, the PC Server 500 that I picked up on 9/11/2001 in the Phoenix area. Drove in the morning and picked that up, and I called that Destiny for some reason. I don't know what really the name in parts, but that's just what I selected at the time. So as I said, Robbie is a IBM PS2 Model 57 SLC, but it does have an upgrade daughtercard CPU on it of the IBM 486 SLC3. And the CPU daughtercards, I'll probably cover those when I cover the interior of the units. In this case, it's clock tripled inside, but the planar clock is 20 megahertz, as we see here, meaning that it runs the internal way it runs that CPU in the daughter card is at 60 megahertz instead of. There can be cases where that daughter card on the 9500 series or on the planar runs at 75 megahertz internally. And at one point, I looked, and this is a search trying to figure out how I'd come up with why the system was named Robbie. I did see that I had I did have this unit seemingly as far back as 2001, maybe even the year 2000, and I called it the fastest 16-bit PS2 that I had at that time. Although now I have the systems that have a 16-bit microchannel bus that are a little bit faster CPU, in this case of having a 46 SLC3 but running at 75 megahertz. I don't have a coprocessor in that spot, and the CPU daughter card would effectively run that coprocessor, which would be like a 387 SX or SL, and it would run that at 20 megahertz in this system, not at that higher rate that the CPU runs internally. Internal cache is enabled, and the 46 SLC2 and 46 SLC3 have 16 KB of internal cache, and that really helps their performance. Model of F8 again, anything above a 386 or above, IBM didn't really distinguish as much by calling it the F8 BIOS model, and the submodel of 25 in this instance. BIOS revision 0B, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how many. I don't think there was 11 versions of the BIOS for this that existed, but that's how it's showing for the BIOS revision. and the BIOS ROM date, and that's rather late for PS2s in this case because being in 1993, so June 22nd of 1993, and then we have a planar ID or a pause ID of the system board, E2FE, and that typically depended upon the riser that was in the system. It was a way that the system could determine that it was running on the same planar that would be in the model 56 or 57, but it was in a model 57 case. That riser was 5 microchannel slots high, and that planar ID would change with that riser that was plugged in. Okay, and as we've seen before, the parallel and serial port information just tells how many of those ports are present. In this case, both of those are on the planar, of course, and both of those are the 25-pin variety, the full-sized. The serial port is not that DB9 miniaturized connector. It's a full DB25. Okay, SCSI information. There should be a lot of detail here, and this, even though the SCSI controller is on the system planar, it's treated as being in as an adapter in that sense, and at least it identifies from here within the system information tool as being on the system board. Okay. And IBM SCSI adapter, one SCSI device connected, which is the hard drive, SCSI index, SCSI DMA arbitration level of 8, SCSI fairness on, wait state is none, SCSI adapter ID is 7, which is typical with IBM SCSI again. Adapter is operational, and of course I would hope so. SCB compatibility level is current, and that's like a system control block, I think. Maximum synchronous data rate of 5 megabits per second, and that's the normal, what's treated as being the narrow SCSI or the 50-pin SCSI or 60-pin externally. Then when you have the fast wide, it gets into the higher data rates. SCSI global timeout value is 60 seconds. Port address in hexadecimal, and that's pretty standard. You have the selection of a lot of different addresses, but 3540 is pretty common as the base address for this IBM SCSI adapter in the system. Okay, and SCSI fixed disk. It's a fixed disk drive or hard drive. Scatter, gather supported. Cache buffer not enabled. IBM fixed disk drive. Adapter index 0, slot 0. Logical unit number LUN of 0. Physical unit number PUN, and that's the SCSI ID of the drive, is 6. Timeout count 60 seconds. Device key, again hexadecimal 0066. I don't know what that means. Logical device number of 0, probably because it's the first and only of that SCSI drive. And then we get down to, lastly, the video information. And it does see that extended VGA video, and tells us we have a color display attached. We're seeing things in color here. But it's telling us that it has 256 kilobytes of video RAM, when we saw previously it's identified under the VESA driver as 512. And I'm thinking the system information tool just has that hard coded in there. And so it shows the color depth available as 16 colors. And truly, if you run the VESA driver, you were able to get up to the 256 colors. and it even recognizes even some better screen resolutions than just that 640 by 480 as well to that. So they're just hard-coded information, in this case in SIT, and we'll see a little bit later as we talk about the video RAM of the of these systems. Okay, so that is that's running the system information tool on this Model 57. In this case, upgraded with the 46 SLC3 CPU. If you do like this video, click on that like button. Please subscribe to my channel. There'll be a lot more content like this. We'll see what other systems we can run through that system information utility as well. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.